Welcome to the Ship Happens podcast, a podcast about construction, education, and everything in between. I am your host, Joseph Garibaldi, and I invite you to take a listen to a new and exciting podcast about construction and teaching. Thank you guys.
What's going on, everyone? Joseph Garibaldi here. Ship Happens, number 11. I'm pretty pumped to be here. It's actually kind of a grim day. You guys listen to these episodes a week before I record them, so I'm recording them 11/5 right now. We just had an election. If you're from the United States, you know this. If you're not from the United States, you also probably know this. And while this isn't a political podcast, and while I'm really not going to talk about the election too much, it is something that's weighing pretty heavy on my heart, and it's something that I feel like I need to address because I know that some of our students, some of our workers, some of our colleagues may be going through some pretty trying times, I guess, and pretty, uncertain times. So how do you teach during uncertainty? When there's questions that can't be answered, I think those questions are the hardest to navigate because we don't know what's going to happen with this election, right? I may have ideas, I may have my own thoughts that I think will happen, but I don't really think it matters too much. I think what really matters is my kids and where we're moving with our content. Elections happen all the time. I'm only 25 years old. When I was born, the president that was elected was Bill Clinton. I've lived through Bush, Obama, Trump. All right, I've only really seen in memory 3 presidents, which some of you guys may have seen a lot more presidents than I have. But our kids, many of them have only seen really Obama and then now Trump. That's really it. That's all the only presidents they've seen. They've only seen 2 presidents. Were they the best presidents we've had? That's debatable. I don't think the presidents that I've saw were the best presidents we've had, but it's near here or there. We're still, in my personal opinion, I think we're the greatest country in the world. I don't think we need to make us great again. We're already great, but that's also up for debate, and we're not going to get into that right now. I just want to talk about teaching during uncertainty and how we work during these uncertain times. In California especially, it's very worrying. There's a lot of propositions that get brought up every year, and a lot of them are really, really bad, and a lot of them are really, really good. Let me pull up the ones right now. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple that really relate to construction and also relate to teaching and kind of the pros and cons about. So California usually has a handful of propositions, and some of them relate to like taxes, other ones relate to social policies. It really relates to a bunch of different things. It really just depends on who is actually like the actual target demographic of it. California has had 11 propositions this election, which is definitely a lot. A few of them relate to construction. I have to talk about a couple of these things so that we can actually figure out where our customers are going to be going, because in reality, our customers are what drives our business. So in terms of the main ones for our customers, in California, we have Proposition 15. We also have Proposition 19, Proposition 21, and that looks about it that I see that we're going to have some problems with. Now, I'm going to come at this from a business standpoint and from a construction standpoint and why these are, either good or bad propositions. I'm not coming at this from a personal standpoint or even what I voted on. I am just trying to get you guys to understand what is going on in the construction industry that could potentially hurt or help the industry as a whole. Yes, right now we want to talk about the presidential election. Trump and Biden are arguably 2 of the most polarizing figures in politics, and they are just completely different people, but they're also pretty similar on some things. But we don't need to talk about that. I think the news is enough talking. What we need to talk about is what impacts construction and what impacts our wallets. Prop 15 is probably the scariest one of all. Being a teacher, I have really mixed opinions about Prop 15. Now that the election is over, I can kind of speak a little bit about it because I do have some sort of restriction on my contract I sign. I can't really talk about politics and give my position on certain things. I can now talk about them because the election is over, so we can kind of look at the different propositions, talk about what they mean for construction, and talk about why they might not be good or might be really good. We're going to see. Prop 15 requires commercial and industrial properties to be taxed based on market value and dedicates revenue to schools and communities. Understand, way back in the day, in like the 70s or 80s, California kind of led the change. And the reason why we're talking about California, by the way, is one, I live here and that's what I know the most of. 2, if California does something, usually the rest of the states follow suit. Usually all the rest of the states follow California's propositions. So when it comes down to Prop 15, I was really nervous because this would raise commercial and industrial properties. Back in the 70s, there was a big push to limit commercial and industrial property taxes and make it so you had to pass propositions in order to raise those taxes. Well, it worked for business, and business boomed during that time. It allowed a lot of immigrants, like people in my family, to buy commercial properties and rent them out or sell them, whatever. But on the other hand, it hurt schools tremendously. A lot of schools got money money from those commercial, industrial, and residential properties, and it severely hurt them. Severely. So Prop 15 is trying to overturn some of those like, I don't know, properties from the previous proposition. Here's the deal. In this state, we have introduced a lot of different things to help education, and nothing really actually helped education. We brought in the lottery system to help education, and that money hasn't really gone towards education. We've tried raising different taxes. All that money kind of gets thrown into the general budget and not to education. So it's really difficult. That being said, we're in a very vulnerable time right now in our state. We have a pandemic going on. We have people losing their businesses left and right. People can't pay rent. And now at this particular time, you want to raise taxes on those companies that are struggling right now. I think it was just a bad time for this proposition, right? Maybe if it would have came at a different time with no pandemic, maybe it would have passed. Right now, it's not completely called, but 51% is no. So it looks like it's not going to pass. And maybe I'll know more next week when you hear this. Maybe like, oh yeah, that proposition didn't pass, or maybe it did pass. Who knows? But right now, it's looking like it's not going to pass. And that's a good thing in my personal opinion. I don't think we can afford, businesses can't afford this. If we're doing construction and we are helping people, we need to make sure there's actually people that we can help and we can do construction for. If we tax those people out and raise their taxes in this time where they're getting no money, there's not going to be a job for us. And it's hard to teach because I have to be very careful on what I say politically. One, I don't want to be polarizing. I want to be, and I always am open. I will hear any sort of other argument or other side. I'm very open, and that's kind of what I pride myself on, is I'm not closed-minded. I like to hear about what people do. I like to kind of go through all of that political process, and that's a good thing. But it's hard because I'm trying to prepare kids for a job outside of school, and it's my responsibility to make sure that there's going to be a job outside of school. I can't let businesses get taxed out. And it's a double-edged sword. I know that if it votes no, but there's a good chance if the money even did go to us, then that's great. I'm able to have more money and get more renovations and get better facilities for my kids. But will my kids end up having a job at the end of it? If all the businesses leave, then there's no job for my kid to have, right? So it's just scary. It's scary to think about. It's scary to go through. Let's move down real quick to Proposition 19. This one is expected to pass. So basically what Proposition 19 does is it changes the tax assessment, transfers, and inheritance rules. So essentially, baby boomers at 55 years old buy a house. In case you guys don't know this, your housing taxes really only change tremendously when you buy a house, because that's the only time they assess your house tax-wise and raise your taxes up. Little propositions and stuff only raise it up maybe a couple $100, but like when we're talking about thousands of dollars, in fact, I bought a house recently. My house taxes for the year is about $1,200. In April, when I get my tax evaluation or get my new taxes, when they reassess my house and it goes up, my house will then have a tax value of, I think, almost $3,000. So I went up twice as much I went up my taxes. But I'm never really going to go up any more than that. Like, it's going to take a long time and a lot of bonds and propositions being passed for my taxes to go up in my house. So people in 55 years old, these baby boomers and old Gen Xers, bought a house back in the day and they have a very low tax rate. Well, say if they want to move and retire and move to a different part of the state, some of them can't afford the higher taxes, because if they're used to paying, $600 a year in taxes, then they move into another house and it gets reassessed a year after they move. So these baby boomers couldn't buy a house because they can afford the $600, but when they buy a house and it gets reassessed, they're now going to have to pay $3,000, and that's a little insane for them. So what's the plan? What's the goal here? So they want to remove that. So if you're 55 years or older, your property tax stays no matter where you go. Well, okay, that means states are going to be losing money then, or counties, local governments are going to lose money on their property taxes. No. They're going to figure out a way to get that money by taxing inheritance. So follow along. They want to make it more fair for 55-year-old people to relocate and buy a house in California. Totally honorable, right? Totally understand. Makes some sense to me. But what they want to do is they want to tax inheritance. Now, if someone dies and they leave the house to you, you have to pay a couple things. You have to pay an inheritance tax, but typically property transfers over pretty easily. In fact, the tax rate that was bought, so say my grandmother, say she bought a house, she's paying $500 in property taxes. Let's say she, hopefully not for a long time, but let's say she transfers the house to my name. She doesn't have to pass away. She transfers the house to my name. If I'm not permanently living living at that house, my tax value goes up because it goes with market value. So she has a house that she bought in San Jose. She actually built that house back in the late 90s. That tax rate tripled, but she's still paying the initial tax rate that she paid in the 90s. So what happens is that, so let's say she doesn't even die. She just transfers it over to my name. I'm not living at that house, so that means my tax rate will go up to its current rate in San Jose, and I wouldn't be able to afford that house. So that's how they're going to get that extra money and merge that gap. It looks like this is going to pass. They haven't quite called it yet, but it looks like it's going to pass. The reason why this is kind of bad on construction fronts, and this is actually the least bad one in my personal opinion, is that most people, when they get a house through inheritance, they have to do some work on that house before they resell it. Most of the time, as people get older, you typically aren't able to do certain things, and some things in the house age faster, and you're not able to fully renovate that sort of stuff. And you can increase the house value tremendously by just remodeling and reselling, kind of like flipping a house for pure profit. I know it's kind of grim and dark. You don't want to just sell off your family house. Some people don't want to sell their family house, but some people just may want to fix it up and have it, this is what, mom will have wanted, or this is what grandpa will have wanted in his house. So they're going to come to my students, they're going to come to you guys, they're going to come to construction workers and ask them to renovate that house. That happens all the time. Well, if inheritance tax raises, they're going to sell this house. They're not going to be able to afford that, and they're going to sell the house for a cheaper price. Now, granted, this is why it's not super bad. Some people that buy it may hire you anyways to come in and remodel it. But as of right now, this proposition, I don't know how it's going to do construction-wise. I know it's kind of bad on inheritance and transfers, but construction, this one has a potential to impact it negatively, but it also has a potential to really not do anything at all. So it really just depends. The next one, Prop 22, or not 22, that one's the Uber one. We don't want to talk about that one. Prop 21 expands local government's power to use rent control. The government, in my personal opinion, should have no power to tell me what I can charge in rent. Obviously, it has to be within reason, but that's our free choice. If I'm not happy with the rent, I can move somewhere else that I am happier with the rent. Personally, that's how I personally feel. This one overwhelmingly did not pass. Local government should not have the power to use rent control. The reason why is people still have to make a little bit of money. At the end of the day, if you're renting a house, I rented a house for a good majority of my life, I am paying a cheaper monthly fee for a rented house, but I have certain things, if you have a good landlord, I have certain things that I get with that, like little bonuses. If there's something wrong, I call the landlord. It's his job to fix it. If there is a leak or a tear, it's the landlord's job to fix it. It's the landlord's job to get that done, but the landlord makes money off of me, so essentially I'm kind of paying for it, but it's a good deal overall. The landlord makes some money. I have a place to live, a cheaper place to live than buying. I don't usually have to worry about too much. If something breaks at my house, I have to fix it, or I have to hire someone to fix it. I don't have the luxury of calling a landlord up and having him fix my house. So it's a win-win situation, right, for everyone involved. If the government limits rent control, it's good for renters, but renters aren't going to have a house to actually rent because landlords are not going to want to rent out their houses. They're just going to sell and play that game. So it becomes a little bit of an issue with that. And I'm glad that that one did not pass. I'm glad that that one, and they always, I think every year almost, they do a rent control sort of thing, but it's bad deal. I would never vote for that. Personally, that's the only one I'll tell you what I didn't vote for. Maybe you can kind of guess, but I think when it comes down to rent control, it's a bad thing. We need to make sure we have houses that we can live in, and we need to make sure we maintain that balance. Okay, so in terms of proposition, that's the only thing I can really talk about, but I want to pivot that. There's 3 propositions, and there's always a couple that affect construction and affect my kids' jobs, even their parents' jobs. Some of them may be worried and stressed about their parents. I can kind of feel it during this time. Even when it comes down to presidencies, I can feel that stressfulness, and I can feel that uncertainty from my students. So how do I teach through that uncertainty? You kind of have to ignore it while it's going on. You kind of have to just kind of ignore all this stuff and just kind of pretend that it's not there yet. Nothing is 100% for sure, so there's no reason really to talk about it until it is 100% for sure. Like, okay, Proposition 15 right now is unsure. I'm not going to address it with my student. I may not even address it this year. I may address it later on. But if it does get passed, that's something that could potentially impact them, potentially harm their parents, potentially cost people jobs, and that's a negative thing. So what do? Well, we don't say anything until we know for sure. And I think that's the hardest thing for most people. Everyone wants to be in the loop. We are in a generation where we have to know every step of the way. So how do we make that better? What do we do to make things better? And I think that is I wouldn't say the hardest thing, but how do we make kids feel better? Well, we have to know a little bit more about the details. And that's hard to do right now because we're in a generation where we get everything right at our fingertips. We get everything we could ever want. But right now is like the first really election that I can remember where I didn't know who won that night. I still don't know know who won. I still don't know what propositions won. I can make assumptions, but I still don't know. And I think that's probably one of the scarier things, is that I really don't know what's going on. And neither do your students. Your students don't know what's going on. So you need to kind of ignore the facts right now. You can maybe address it a little bit, but if you have to address it, or if a student asks, then slowly address it, but you don't really know yet. Until you know, then you can possibly address it if the time is right. But remember, we still have curriculum we have to get through. We still have work to be done. Just like in a job and building a building, there is still stuff that needs to be done. So we continue working. We continue getting that stuff done. We ignore the bogus things going on in the world, and we still focus on our curriculum. We still focus on building things. We still focus on building those relationships and getting stuff kind of handled and finished. So that's something that I can recommend. That's something that I can recommend to every educator out there. If you're listening to this, just focus on getting your content over with. Don't worry about this stuff yet. This is always uncertain, right? And I know this affects your students. This affects you. Even in construction, if you're in the construction industry and you're listening to this right now, this affects you. But your workers still need to get their jobs done, right? They still need to finish the task at hand, and slowly you can bring it up and address. And that goes for almost anything. Later on, I'm going to talk about teaching through loss. And I've been through a couple different sites where we've lost teachers, we lost students. Even in high school, I lost students. And how do we teach through depression? How do we teach through losing people? And I'm going to talk about that. And it's similar to teaching through uncertainty. How do we push through this uncertainty and these propositions, this election? We just got to put your head down and just keep working, right? Just keep working, chipping away, working. And eventually you will be where you need to be, right? That's kind of the biggest thing I can recommend to everyone. As a nation, let's stand up together. Let's focus on the task at hand. We all have jobs that we're handling right now. Right now, I open the news every day and I try to, figure things out. And it's just, it's hard. It's hard. I get asked by kids every single day, every class period, what do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen? I'm like, I don't know. But what I do know is we have a test coming up. We have an assignment coming up. We have a job coming up that we need to finish. That's what I do know. Teaching through loss, and you'll hear my story in a couple episodes, but teaching through loss is something completely different, right? It's something that has to be addressed. But this uncertainty in elections, you're going to face that every so often, right? So focus on the job. Focus on being the best for your students. Focus on being the best for your workers. It's all you really need to do. Every election, there's going to be propositions that you agree and disagree with. You've heard some of my propositions that I disagree with, and they're scary. They're scary to think about. They're scary to think about the implications of them. It's hard to have faith in your fellow voters, but have faith in them, right? We're a nation, we're a state, we know what's best for each other, and right now I'm looking at the propositions that were passed. I don't see too many bad ones that were passed. They're all pretty logical, what passed. And we may have a difference in agreement on that one, but it's okay. Like right now, I personally think I'm okay with what they passed and what they didn't pass. I think that's okay. That being said, guys, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Try not to let this stuff get to you. Hopefully it'll be over. I don't think it will, but when you hear this next week on 11/12, hopefully it will be over. Hopefully you'll be able to breathe a little bit more of a breath of, or a sigh of relief, and we can move on from this. Till then, guys, I will see you guys next week with another exciting episode. I felt like this episode was all over the wall, but I just wanted to give you guys some sort of purpose, and it's been weighing heavy on me, and I really want to make sure I handle my feelings right, because this stuff is pretty heavy stuff, and it's not fun to really talk about, but it's something that I'm concerned with, and I really want to address and bring up. All right, guys, thank you very much. If you guys have any questions, if you have any comments, you can shoot me on Twitter _Chip Happens. You can find me there. You can also find me on YouTube if you want to watch these videos. I'm not really recording video right now, but if you want to watch some videos I have and see how I build things, see my shop, see who I am, you can kind of subscribe to me at California Carpentry and Construction. It'd be pretty fun. You can also follow me on TikTok if you want. I kind of record funny videos for my kids. I'm Mr.Garibaldi. You can find me on there. Anyways, guys, hey, thank you for listening. Episode 11, always a fun time. I will see you guys next week.
This has been an episode of the Chip Happens podcast. Thank you all for listening, and I will catch you next week with another exciting episode.